could be worse.
You could be worse. But last night was fun, right? Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming to my talk. I'm going to be talking about iOS with continuous delivery. Before I start, who knows what continuous delivery is? Okay, good. I'm just trying to gauge the crowd and see how much I have to go into it, so I may go over it a little bit faster if a good majority of the crowd knows what it is. But before we get started, I actually wanted to introduce myself. So I'm Cassie Shum. I've actually worked for a company called ThoughtWorks. Who's heard of ThoughtWorks? Okay, some people. Last night was interesting. Everyone's like, what works? What are you talking about? Gosh. So essentially, ThoughtWorks, we're an IT consultancy who creates custom software like internationally. And so I've been there for about 8 years now, which to me, it just went by super fast because I tend to go to all these different clients around the world and actually, consult on what they actually should be doing with their architecture. And in my case, I'm more of a mobile architect, so looking at mobile strategy and really thinking about enterprise systems. But before I did that, I actually started off with this. So this, you can actually even tell, this is from the first iOS. And so when I was learning how to do iOS, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to make an app about dogs. I mean, why not? Look at this cute little dog, right? And so when I actually made this app, it was in the App Store for probably a total of 2 months. It was awesome. I think I got like $3 from it. But when I was making it, I was really excited, It was like, okay, I'm learning Objective-C, and then, getting an app out in the App Store. The whole process was somewhat painful, but exciting to learn all of these things, and I'm sure everybody's been there. As I was actually making this, and now looking back at it, I actually realized that I made the Tinder for dogs at the time. I should have kept going with that, and maybe became a billionaire, but whatever, that's fine. I let that one go, and again, as I said, it was probably in the App Store for about 2 months, and then I got my job with ThoughtWorks. And so when I actually started my job with ThoughtWorks, they said this was at the beginning of iOS development, so there was not really many iOS developers. So when one of our biggest bank clients said, we want an iOS application, I was probably one of the first people sent over there, because they were like, oh, you did an app or something, so go over there. And so I did, and it was really, really fun, and we actually made this really cool iPhone app. But then we left, as consultancies do, and about a year later, they called us back and said, yeah, it doesn't work. It really doesn't work. And so we were like, what do you mean it doesn't work? And said, we did have the feature functionalities that you guys built. It was really, really hard to build all of the new features and upgrade and do all of these different things. So as part of my company, we actually do specialize in like agile, continuous delivery, and really thinking about scaling and making sure that enterprise clients and mobile applications and any type of architecture is evolvable, okay? So this actually leads me into what do we do with continuous delivery in iOS, because it was a bit behind back in the time. Still a little bit is now, so we can talk about that. So first, before I get into the mobile bit, I'm going to talk about continuous delivery. So this is the book, famous book by Jess Humble and Dave Farley. Jess actually used to work for ThoughtWorks, so we are pretty much like in a cult, and everyone needed to know exactly what continuous delivery was. But when I go outside of my cult, I actually look around and I'm like, okay, what's continuous delivery? And it's actually interesting how some people don't actually really think about continuous delivery as a first-class citizen. So that's what I'm here to talk about. So the first question is, I saw a few hands go up. Can someone actually tell me the difference between continuous deployment and continuous delivery? All the hands don't go up anymore. Yeah.
Well, one is just it goes up until like releasing or deployment, and the other one is basically automatic, also the deployment.
Okay, so I heard some automated, I heard some going up to a certain point. Okay, interesting. Anybody else have thoughts? Okay, well then I'll just tell you the answer. So essentially, continuous deployment is really thinking about, I can actually, I do deploy to production. So you can actually deploy any type of software to production at any time, really. And if you do it in an automated state, that's actually what we call continuous deployment. However, the question is that application or is that piece of software able to be in production? Like, is it safely in production without crashes, without bugs, without things that are going to stop your business? So if you think about the enterprise bank, can we actually push to production is what we actually had to ask the question. Because if we release a bug and not test it for it, and it could possibly lose millions of dollars from that game. So really we need to think on an enterprise level, can we actually deploy to production? And then this continuous deployment is a mechanism in order to get to continuous delivery. Okay, so I'll go into a little bit more about that. So a few things that we talk about with continuous delivery and why we actually really believe in continuous delivery is a few things. So the first one is a reduced deployment risk. Okay, so every time, I'm sure everybody's been there, I have, when you're actually pushing that button to the App Store, or you're actually pushing that button and deploying to your services, you're like, God, I hope it works. If it doesn't work, I'm going to be here for 48 hours, like with no sleep, right? And so that anxiety is what we want to do in order to reduce that, right? And to be able to make this a normal thing in an automated process. The second one is about believable progress, and I'll actually show what that actually means in a second. And the third one is around user feedback. So this actually plays directly into why we actually want to do continuous delivery, to really hone in what the product you're actually trying to make. Because in the end, it's going to go to your customers, and your customers dictate what they actually want in your applications and what they're actually going to be using. Okay? So if you look at reduced deployment risk, when you actually think about continuous delivery and actually pushing your applications to production as often as possible, you're actually looking at maybe a few days worth of work, a few lines of code. But think about if I say, okay, we're going to deploy to production in 6 months. How many lines of code have you written in that 6 months, and what's the potential of bugs being in those 2 to 6 months worth of code? The risk is a lot higher, right? And then so when you actually see those bugs, it's like, okay, where is it? Because I have like 2 to 6 months worth of lines of code to go through to find that bug. As opposed to the few days, if you're actually deploying regularly, if a bug shows up and you're like, oh, actually I can look at the last 5 commits and fix that bug immediately and get that going as quickly as possible. So that's where we think about reduced deployment risk. So believability, okay, so being believable for your business. So I always kind of talk about the business as well because in the end they do pay the bills, right? They do pay for software to happen, and okay, and so I believe that this thing is not going to go out. No. So essentially, if you are actually releasing these few lines of code as often as possible in a continuous delivery manner, you can actually start tracking the types of features and the types of functionality that you're pushing to your app, and you can actually tell your business users, look, we actually are going to get these features out in X amount of months or X amount of weeks. You can actually measure that as opposed to, yeah, I think we can get 10 features out in the next year. And obviously, I mean, how many times have people been completely right about that? Yeah, exactly. No hands go up because it's always over. It's always like, oh, well, something came up and blah, blah, blah. But if you actually do it in small incremental pieces, it's a lot more believable. You can actually estimate yourself how long something's going to take in order to push that out into production. And so the final thing, and I think the most important thing in my opinion, is really getting your applications in production as quickly as possible because then you can get that user feedback as quickly as possible. Maybe my idea of that dog app was like super cool, and I thought those stars were really wonderful. But then in my user feedback from the metrics that I see, oh, people didn't know how to tap on those stars, and it actually didn't work. If I got that into production as quickly as possible and saw that feedback, that's something that I can put back into my backlog and change as quickly as possible so we can pivot based on whatever features that your users are giving back to you. So this is actually very important when we think about continuous delivery. Any questions so far? Okay, cool. So, with continuous delivery, we actually have these cycles that we talk about. And so what I'm going to go through today is applying these cycles with an iOS mentality. So we have our build, our deployments, our testing, and our releasing. And this is something, when we say continuous delivery, we're doing over and over and over again. So essentially, this is what we want to do sometimes every day, sometimes every week, depending on your company, sometimes every month. A good example that I've actually recently am writing an article about is with Guild Group. Who's heard of Guild Group? Oh, okay. I shop. So I shop online. And it's actually one of the most successful mobile applications out there. And they actually deploy their Apple application and Android, but iOS application, I think, once every week to the App Store because they're always improving, they're always actually putting new features and those types of things in. And so essentially, what we want to do is really think about this and measuring our success criteria via your cycle time. So every time you come back from production and get information, then you can actually feed back into your application itself, and it makes it better. It just makes it a better software. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started and talk about each of these quadrants. So the first one I'm going to actually be talking about is building your application and some things that you want to consider when you're thinking in a continuous delivery manner. So the two things I always think about is design patterns and clean code, okay? So one thing to note around this is I'm going through all of these quadrants. I'm not going to go very deep on any of these subjects, but if you want to know more, I have talks on every single one of these things too. Okay, so everyone recognizes this, view model controller, right? How many people use that in their applications now? A lot of people. That's actually what Apple and Google are actually pushing forward to is model view controller. Now, one of the things that I've seen in enterprise systems is that they have followed this, for sure. But what are some sticky businesses around using MVC in a massive application? The big one for me is massive view controllers. Okay, the view controllers just explode and they get very bloated. Now, if you're working on an application with yourself and maybe two other developers, it's like, okay, I know what that's doing, I know what that's doing. Now imagine one of these enterprise applications and you have 50 iOS developers or 20 iOS developers feeding into the same code base. Now we may have a little bit of a problem with that view controller, right? So the first thing that I actually think about, and this is not something that I say you must do this, but really think about it for your code base and your engineers, is two other design patterns that I'm looking at. So one is MVVM and the other one is Viper, okay? And so these are two design patterns that we've used in a lot of our big clients throughout the world. So the first one is wow, I can't even say it. Model view model, MVVM. And this is more of around a data binding type of mentality, okay? So this is where your view model, your views are actually bound by the data binding, so you can use reactive Cocoa, reactive Swift in order to do such things. Now there are caveats with those, and I've had troubles with those as well. But the one thing I will say about this is that it actually minimizes now your view controller to actually just be handing off all of your different data. So it exposes, the view model itself exposes methods, commands, and other methods to maintain the state of the view. It can actually manipulate the model result of those view actions itself, so you're actually shifting responsibility over. And then now you can work with the model objects explicitly. So one thing that we've seen from MVVM is that it's a lot more testable than view controllers. And so when we think about continuous delivery, and we'll get into what testing actually means, testing for us is a must, right? Because if I say I need to be safely into production, I gotta make sure I have tests around this and make sure I don't have to break it. Again, if you're thinking about 20 developers going to the same code base, you want to make sure people are not breaking all of this stuff around there. So you want to make sure this is tested well. So this is one example of a pattern. The second one is the clean architecture by Uncle Bob. Who's read about clean architecture in Uncle Bob? Yeah. So one thing I will say is every time I present this in front of mobile developers, they're like, God, that's a lot of crap, right? Like, how many layers are there in there? And I absolutely agree. I would not say that I would start off with a Viper architecture. However, one of my biggest clients right now in South America, I was talking about a little bit last night, is many lines of code, many features, and that's actually the project with 50 developers, and they're still growing in their iOS code. That's just iOS. The Android's a whole other story. So one thing that we did with this is we introduced a Viper architecture, which is a replication of clean architecture. So we're thinking about, how to have single responsibility principle in all of the different modules that you're using. So we have things like the view and the wireframe. The wireframe is actually changing the screens and actually putting things into containers. It has one responsibility. The presenter has one responsibility, so they're to present your view logic. And then you have your interactors that kind of is a conduit between the entities and the data stores. So this is actually a very well-known pattern. And if you actually look into Viper, there's actually like clean architecture templates that you can use in Xcode in order to look at this. Now again, I think this is overkill for more of a smaller application because if you look at that packaging structure, I mean, it's ridiculous. However, If I'm the 50th developer coming into that application and they're telling me to introduce a new feature, I can actually go through all of those packages and understand exactly where my features are and what each responsibility is. And that's actually why we think about these kind of patterns in bigger clients. So I always put this slide in all of my presentations, no matter what, because I really like it. I think this really shows like how I feel sometimes. It's like, okay, I come to a greenfield stage. I'm gonna make a new iOS app, I'm gonna make a new Android app, and now I'm gonna do things the right way because I learned all the hard things earlier. But then much later, we turn into this ball of mess again. And so this is usually happens because there are time pressures. We need to get the features out as soon as possible. We need to make money. We need to get in the App Store. So one thing to think about is not becoming this. This is actually a representation of a code base. Now, it's not an iOS code base, but this is what we call the big ball of mud. And the big ball of mud is something that would happen after a year or 2 years of developing into your applications, because you have a lot of people, pushing code into the applications with different ideas and different thoughts. And so one thing to do is to standardize on actually what clean code actually means for your organization and your applications. In this big ball of mud, this is an actual class right here, which we would call God classes, and which I would call in iOS some of your view controllers, okay? And so what's very scary about that is when I talk about that 50th developer coming in, and they say, okay, you have to change something in that view controller, how scared would you be to change something in that view controller without breaking all of the other connections to that? Pretty damn scared. I'm scared. I'm just not gonna. I'm like, oh, I quit. I can't do this. Okay? So one thing I'm trying to actually talk about is not getting to this big ball of mud now, right? Even in your smaller applications, think about what clean code actually means. So a lot of things that we do with these enterprise systems, because you want to make sure that all the developers and everyone is actually on the same page, is really come up with some linting tools. Like SwiftLint, Tailor are some of the mechanisms in order to say, these are how I'm going to standardize, and this is what clean code means to this organization. Okay? OCLint is the Objective-C version. CPD is actually looking at code duplication, right? How many times are you duplicating code? And that's actually bad too, because if I'm trying to change functionality and I only change it in one spot, now you have differentiating functionality and that's supposed to be the same. Okay? And then, of course, in Xcode, there's static code analysis that you can actually run. And then FP Infer was something that we used on a few clients that actually worked out pretty well on looking at null pointers and those types of things. But now I think static analysis does that as well. Okay? So think about things like that when you're thinking about building your applications. All right? So let's go to deployments. Any questions about building? What do you need questions about first? Cool. All right, so the two things I will talk about deployment is a tool called FASTLANE and deployment platform. So who's heard of FASTLANE? God, it was my favorite thing when it came out. Good Lord, I don't know what we did without it, right? Thank you, Felix Krause. So essentially, I'm not going to go that much into it because everybody really knows, but it's really about automating a lot of these things we're talking about. Automating building your iOS app. Automating running your tests, and automating, the biggest thing is signing certificates, which we all know. I don't want to get started on how many hours I've lost in that one. So essentially, being able to deploy your applications, if you can do it in an automated way using tools like this, then this is actually, you can do it in a replicable way, right? You don't have to say, oh yeah, I think I deployed it this way, but I don't remember, and I push play, and oh my god, now something doesn't work. Just imagine how many developer hours that you're missing in that. So if you have an automated tool in order to push these kind of things out, this is actually the road to continuous delivery, because we are talking about automating to get to the App Store. Okay? So this is an example of FASTLANE file. I think everybody knows what this looks like. But these different lanes are actually very, very good to have, because from a developer point of view, I'm very excited about this, because from command line, I can run my test here, I can build my application, and I can run it, and I can make sure that everything runs okay. When we talk about CI pipelines, and actually having those 50 people go into a continuous integration pipeline, your integration pipeline can use the same FASTLANE scripts. And that's what you actually want to do. You want to replicate your developer environment, to the CI development, or CI environment, to the QA environment, to the staging environment. You want to keep things as similar as possible. So if you're deploying your application and writing your features a little bit differently on your development machine than you are on your QA, you could actually introduce bugs. You don't even know that something's going to happen because you're actually deploying them very differently. So standardizing that on something like FASTLANE is very important. Okay, everybody's heard of test flight and hockey app, right? And so one of the things that I do like to talk about deploying applications is really getting it on the devices as soon as possible, right? So even before you hit production, before you even submit these things to the App Store, what I really like to do is actually have my people, my company, my friends, actually look at the application even before you get to production, and you can actually do that via FASTLANE as well. So every time I push a commit to master, you can actually have like the most updated version of that application in your phone, okay? And not just your phone, everybody in this room can have maybe my application if you guys all have my hockey app account. And that is going to give you the most feedback as well to see if there's bugs, because that's the best way to test your application and see if you're going to crash it and all of those kind of things, and we'll talk about the metrics in a second. So one thing I do like is, anybody work for LinkedIn? No, okay. So LinkedIn for a long time had a really, there was a funny thing about LinkedIn earlier, but one thing about LinkedIn and their mobile applications that I actually really did like was they actually had everybody in their company have a version of their application, their beta version of their application on their phones. And they had their users eat it. So it was essentially dog fooding, okay? And what they found was a good 80% of the bugs that they would have found in production, they actually found just with their employees and playing with the application. And those bugs actually fed back into the backlog before they went into production. So that constant, again, feedback loop is very important in order to get a very stable application into production. Okay. Cool. So testing, this is going to be the longest one because I do feel very passionate about testing. I think testing is very important in order to be able to push your applications to production safely. So we can actually look at this. So testing pyramid, continuous delivery, and actually testing the devices themselves. So let's start out with testing pyramid. So here's just a bunch of tools that we may be using for testing in our iOS application. Who actually does testing on their iOS apps? Okay, so we're using probably XC Test, or there's like Quick and Nimble. There's Kiwi for Objective-C. And then so we have also FB Snapshot Test Kits, which I actually really like a lot. And then you have more of your UI testing around Calabash, Appium, XC UI test, those types of things. And then, of course, there's manual tests, okay? So I have a question about this step. What's the distribution of tests do we have in your application in these types of tools? Is it a lot more on the bottom? Is it a lot more on the top?
Mostly the bottom, a little bit into the next.
Mostly the bottom? No. Very good. Cool.
Then up into that FB Snapshot test case.
Okay.
And it sort of stops there.
Cool. Anybody else?
Just the top.
Just about that in the middle. All right.
We have XC tests and legacy Kiwi.
Legacy Kiwi.
We're trying to get rid of that.
Okay, this is a really good group. I like that. Keep going on that route because all the enterprise places that I see with their mobile applications actually look more like that. Okay? Every time I go, and this is some big companies. Yeah, okay, Safety didn't want to raise his hand, but that's actually what it looks like. You are the majority of most of the people that I talk to. So they're kind of like, yeah, we do unit tests, but we didn't have enough time. We just need to get the feature out. So this becomes very small. But once you get the feature out, you then bloat your QAs into doing a lot of manual tests. And I'm not saying don't do manual tests. We have to do manual tests. But everything is manual tests. And so when we actually think about something like that, this is actually what we actually in the industry call it an ice cream cone testing, so which is not great. And I'll tell you why. So if you think about, that's a rabbit. Some people don't actually understand my books, but that's a rabbit and that's a turtle. So I'm thinking about, really talking about how fast these tests actually run. So you think about your IC tests, your quick tests, your QE tests, they actually run pretty fast. Even in your Xcode environment, you can actually run your test. Did I break something? Awesome. You get that instant feedback. Now, if you actually think about getting all the way up into the manual test, if you're in an organization that you're the developer, did my feature, and then I pass along to QA, that cycle time is probably what? Maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. And I'm not going to actually see what I broke. Oh, he's laughing. Is it longer? Much longer. Okay. Maybe longer, right? And so in that sense, these things actually take a long time for me to get that feedback to see if I actually broke something as a developer. So that's actually one part of it, okay? The other part of it is because these are running very slow, even when you're looking at your UI tests, your Appium, your Calabash, you have to compile, you have to put it on the devices, and you have to run those. Those are actually a bit slower than doing the unit tests as well, okay? So that's one thing. The other thing that the business always thinks about is the money. So how expensive is it to actually do all the manual tests over and over again? How many times does your QA say, yeah, regression test is going to take at least 3 to 4 days, right? Or more, I don't know. But if you're actually looking at these unit tests, then they're actually going a lot quicker, okay? And so you can actually, those are a lot cheaper to deal with. Like we don't have to hire like 1 million QA people in order to test like the one iOS app. And that's actually what I've seen in a lot of these enterprise organizations. What they do is they just stack all the QAs in the world to just keep sitting there and pushing the buttons. And so in the business sense, that's actually a lot more expensive, okay? So one of the things is, okay, so I give them the problem, I'm like, that's what you guys look like. They're like, okay, great, thanks Cassie, what do we do now? And so one of the things that we actually really focus on in transforming a lot of organizations is really pushing down that pyramid. How'd you like that animation? I worked really hard at it. No, I'm kidding. So one thing I will say about this is we will never get away from manual tests. We will never get away from Appium or Calabash. We're never going to get away from those types of things. But as much as you can, push down all the tests as much as possible. So there's an example of a client where they were like, okay, localization, we have to support 5 different languages. So now we actually are manual testing all 5 different languages. Like, do you actually really have to do that in the manual layer? Can you actually do this in the unit test layer and actually test your languages there? And then test a happy path from your manual part? And they were like, oh yeah, probably. And I'm like, okay, do that, okay? Because that is actually going to save you a ton of time, especially every time you go to production and you have to do regression and all those kind of things. You don't want to keep doing those manual long processes all the time. You want to automate that entire process in your unit test level, okay? And this is actually what we call the testing pyramid, not ice cream cup. Okay, so great. I mean, we have tests, wonderful. Now what do we do? We just like have them, we never run them, all of them are broken. Right? So one thing I will talk about is now using those tests in order to keep you in check in terms of continuous integration. So this is an example of what we would say a continuous integration pipeline would be. You would actually compile, like check in your code, compile and unit test in one stage. The next, maybe you're running your functional tests, running your Calabash, Appium, whatever, FB test case. User acceptance tests, and then like pushing into staging so we can actually do some manual testing on the devices and those types of things, okay? And so the reason why we do things like that, the reason why continuous integration is very important for continuous delivery is because we're increasing the confidence for production readiness. If you're automating this entire process, then I actually feel confident that I didn't really break anything because we are running the tests, every single commit that goes through this pipeline. Every single bit of code I push in there, it's actually passing. Or not passing, right? And then you can actually get that feedback and fix it. So these pipeline stages are what we call these feedback opportunities, okay? So every time the build breaks, maybe at functional tests, what we should do is everyone in the team holds a line and says, okay, no one check in, what broke? And fix that right now. And if you fix that now and have that developer mentality, then you're actually gonna feel that not that much problems in the future because you're actually catching those bugs way earlier on the process than way later. And think about the developer mentality as well. If I'm actually working on a feature, and when the pipeline goes and I see that red, I still have the context of what I just pushed. And I can actually go back and say, oh yeah, Okay, I can see exactly what I pushed, and that's a few lines of code, and let me fix that right now. Now think about 3 weeks later, and someone says, you broke that, and I'm like, wait, what did I do? I don't even know what I did yesterday, much as what I did 3 weeks ago. So that cognitive complexity actually increases as time goes on, and it takes a lot longer to fix those bugs. Okay? So these are some examples of continuous integration tools that we've used. Jenkins, GoCD, Circle CI, TeamCity. I'm sure people are using some of these tools. One interesting story I'll give about this is in this bank that I was working at, the bureaucracy, and this is just a tangent, the bureaucracy of this enterprise is that they didn't allow any Macs for me to buy any Macs in this enterprise. They were like, oh, it has to go through this process, and it's going to take you 3 months to get a Mac. I'm like, 3 months to get a Mac? I just go to Apple Store and get it right now. But that bureaucracy was ridiculous. So I literally had to chase down every single person in this company to find a Mac so I can run my CI pipelines in, because Apple makes it very hard to run CI pipelines for Xcode. So that's my little tangent there. But that's how important I found continuous integration, and that's how much we were pushing it. Oh, I talked a lot, that was annoying. So, going back to continuous delivery, one thing that Jess Humble actually does in some of his presentations, I'm completely stealing this, is he likes polling the crowd around if you're actually doing continuous integration. Because every time I say, yeah, continuous integration, I say, oh yeah, I'm doing that. Our organization's doing that. But I'm going to give you a test and see if you're actually doing it. So let's try with this. Okay, so everyone put your hand up. Even if you don't want to. Put your hand down if you don't have every developer commit to master and trunk every day. Okay, some goes down, that's fine. Put your hand down if every commit does not trigger a build and run a test. Okay? And the last one is, if you're actually running, compiling a test, are the failures usually fixed within minutes? Okay, yeah, good. That's very good. Because this is actually the part that people miss a lot. People say, yes, I have Jenkins, and I'm actually doing, oh yeah, you can put your hand down, sorry. Unless you have a question. But people usually have this problem because they say, oh yes, I have Jenkins, and we're running it, and we ran all of our tests. But it's been read for a while, but it's okay. I'm just going to push it anyways. And that's actually where you're not doing continuous integration, because the point of having these continuous integration pipelines is to catch the failures early and to fix them as soon as possible. And if they're not being fixed within minutes, you're kind of defeating the purpose of it, and you probably shouldn't have a CI pipeline, and then you have other problems. Okay, so something to think about when we think about continuous integration. So when I talk about, my little tangent about Xcode and being able to run CI pipelines, my God, I had so many problems actually trying to, find my Xcode server, and then I had my macOS build, and then having the profiles and signing it on the CI pipelines. Oh my gosh, it was a big mess. And so a lot of times people are like, yeah, I can do CI because it's too hard with Apple. Fair enough. But what I'm saying here is it going to get better? It is. So in the newest Xcode, they have some really cool things coming out. So before that, when we fought all these long battles, that's where FASTLANE actually came in to play to really help us with actually signing and doing all these profile things. But now in the new Xcode, the Xcode server is built within Xcode 9, which is going to be really cool. And actually the Xcode bot will actually have parallel device running, and also the code signing as well. So actually Apple is making this a lot easier for us to do continuous integration. So thank you for finally coming to play. It's awesome. But the one thing that I do like about the new Xcode is the parallelization of running on devices. Okay, so that's something that we weren't, that's something that we weren't able to do in the previous versions. It's just like, okay, I'm going to just deploy to this one. But in the new Xcode, we're able to parallelize and actually run a lot of our automated tests on multiple devices at the same time. So that's actually very exciting for me for a few reasons. In that old CI integration build that you saw there, we did have it hooked up to 4 different Apple devices, but they always had to be hooked up, they always had to be charged. Everyone was like, these are not small things either. They're like, well, we can't leave them overnight, so we have to lock them up, but that means then you're not running your CI pipelines, and then my counterparts in India are like, hello, why aren't you having CI? Because I have to lock them up, right? You can actually lock up these things now, because it can be done wirelessly through the new Xcode. So being able to parallelize that. And since I got the timer, I'm going to go a little bit faster, but the other thing to do is actually like AWS clouds and actually running those kind of things. And the reason why I kind of bring this up is because if your organization can pay for this, which some of ours do, then this could be another route for you to go. But now that Xcode is actually making this easier, you can actually do your own device farms within your organization. I actually prefer that, especially for iOS, because there's not that many devices. Now if you're Android, that's a different story. So well, this is not about Android. Okay. So that's all around continuous integration and testing. The final thing I want to talk about is actually releasing into the App Store. And this is a part that I think a lot of people have good context around because we've actually had to suffer through this. But really thinking about automating that whole process as well. So, you know, this is just an example of like a very big airline that is actually in the App Store. When I actually was looking at the slide earlier, I was like, oh, it doesn't have very good star ratings. It's 2 stars. Not very good. We don't work for them, by the way, so it's fine. So, but one thing I actually want to show around this is thinking about all those different screenshots. But when you think about a massive enterprise system, like American Airlines or United or Lufthansa or whatever, these screenshots actually have to be in different languages, different screenshots, all of those different things. So now I'm thinking, my God, that's going to take forever. So thank you, FASTLANE, once again, for automating screen grab and being able to deliver that metadata in order to actually get these things ready for the App Store submission. Again, this process can be in your pipeline to automate this process, right? So the more you automate, the less work you have to do. Because that is just trivial work, having to grab all the screenshots. I mean, I feel bad for the person with that job. But if we can automate this process, we can actually, you know, make sure that we have everything that we need for the App Store. So again, thank you, FASTLANE. And so some other things that FASTLANE does is, you know, Slack integration, and I think they actually came out with a pre-chat to the App Store. Have you used it? Oh my God, amazing, right? So those are the kind of things, is using the tools at your disposal that already do the things that I don't want to do manually. If someone's already solved the problem for me, then thank you. Less work for me. I'm probably one of the laziest developers in the world. I don't want to do work that everybody else has already figured out, right? So these are the kind of things that you really want to think about when you're actually pushing to the App Store. Okay? And so the final thing I want to talk about around this is, you know, all right, great. We have our application in the App Store. So, you know, these are developers, and they made this really wonderful iOS app. And now it's all to the masses, and it's all to the people. So now we're done, right? Lord, no, we're not done. Because that's actually what I thought, which is why my dog app only lasted 2 months. Because I was like, oh no, we're going to make all the money. No, I'm not. And so the thing is, now what do we do coming backwards, right? So what happens in this continuous delivery model? What we really want to think about is metrics, okay? Something to really, really think about in your applications as soon as possible. So these are just some screenshots of different tools that you can do to really understand who your users are, where are they using it, what devices are they using it on. This is actually really important in Android because you need to be able to know which devices to deprecate because you want to support every device in the world, right? But then with iOS, you actually really need to think about where people are using it, in what locations. If you're a big enterprise, are they actually using it more in India? Are they using it here? Are they using it there? Why aren't they using it there? Is there something that's going on over there? Let's go pinpoint what that actually means. So when we think about that last part of continuous delivery, getting that user feedback and understanding what they're actually doing here, right? So you can see, like, oh, it's all in the US, but maybe it's nowhere else. Why? Why hasn't it picked up? How can we actually go and fix that problem for our organization? Okay? So really, going back to this is that user feedback cycle and really thinking about having your metrics drive your features. So a lot of the times, I have my product people say, oh yeah, I think that's a good idea. Oh, okay, but now let's prove out that idea. I mean, we're scientists at heart, we're computer scientists. And so hypothesis-driven and metrics-driven, I'm much more of I need the data, and I need to understand what people are actually using, what features are actually being used. So you can actually have metrics within your application saying, wow, everybody keeps going to this screen, everybody keeps going to this feature. No one ever goes to this feature. Maybe like 1 out of 2,000 pushes that button. Do we need to keep supporting that? Maybe not, because people aren't using it. And so why waste developer time supporting something and pushing it out there in order to, in order to like what? Nobody uses it? So this is the kind of thing that you really want to think about when you think about your metrics and what people are actually using out in the public. So, sum up, that's continuous delivery. And these are the 4 quadrants that we sort of went through. If you want any more information on any of those things in greater detail, I have a lot of material on that, and I can actually post a lot of that as well. Okay? Thank you.